Alexander Hawthorne glanced at his watch. Patek Philippe. He swallowed a smirk. He thought the hardest part of his day would be finding a cab in Midtown. He thought the woman across the aisle was nothing more than a discarded accessory. A small-town nobody. He could crush with a single signature. He was dead wrong. In exactly 4 minutes, the double doors behind him wouldn't just open. They would be kicked in. Alexander thought he was finalizing a divorce. He had no idea. He was declaring war on the deadliest bloodline in North America. And by the time the first boot hit the floor, it would be too late to beg. But to understand the violence about to tear through Manhattan's Superior Court, we have to go back to the silence before the storm. The courtroom smelled of lemon polish, old mahogany, and expensive lies. To Alexander, it smelled like victory. At 38, the CEO of Hawthorne Tech looked like he'd been carved out of a shark's tooth. Sleek, predatory, entirely cold. He adjusted the cuffs of his bespoke Italian suit, catching his reflection in the table. Perfect. He wasn't thinking about the 10 years his wife, Sarah, spent balancing his books or nursing him through ulcers when his empire was just a laptop in a garage. He was thinking about Jessica, his 24-year-old PR director, currently waiting at the Ritz-Carlton with a bottle of Dom Perignon on ice. "Look at her," Alexander whispered, leaning toward his lead counsel. "Pathetic." Arthur Pendergast didn't smile. They called him the Butcher of Broadway for a reason. He didn't just win cases, he gutted the opposition and left them to dry on the sidewalk. "Standard procedure, Alex," Pendergast murmured, his voice a dry rattle. "We break her spirit first. She signs the NDA, waives the alimony, and crawls back to whatever dirt farm in Wyoming you plucked her from." Across the aisle, Sarah Hawthorne sat in absolute stillness. She wore a gray dress, washed until the fabric thinned. Her hair was pulled back into a severe, practical bun. Her hands were folded on the table. No shaking, no tears. Next to her, Timothy O'Malley, a court-appointed public defender who looked like he'd graduated 15 minutes ago, was drowning in sweat. He fumbled with his papers, dropping a pen, then scrambling to retrieve it. "Mrs. Hawthorne," Timothy whispered, his voice cracking. "Please, we take the lowball offer. 5,000 is better than 0. Sarah didn't turn her head. Her eyes were locked on the empty judge's bench. "Pendergast is a shark, Sarah," Timothy hissed, panic rising. "He's going to paint you as a gold digger. He's going to claim infidelity. It doesn't matter if it's a lie. They have photos, doctored maybe, but photos. They have witness statements from staff you've never met. They are going to destroy you." "Let them try," Sarah said. Her voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the noise like a razor blade. Timothy stared at her. This wasn't the calm of a defeated woman. It was the heavy, suffocating pressure of the eye of a hurricane. Alexander caught her eye from across the room. He smirked, mouthing one word, "Goodbye." Sarah didn't blink. She just watched him, eyes dark, void of anything human. "All rise!" Judge Harold Bentley swept into the room, black robes billowing. He collapsed into his chair, looking bored. Another rich Manhattan husband dumping his starter wife. Just a typical Tuesday. "We are here for the matter of Hawthorne versus Hawthorne," Judge Bentley droned, cleaning his glasses. "Mr. Pendergast, opening statement." Pendergast stood up. He didn't walk. He prowled. He buttoned his jacket and turned his back on the judge to play to the gallery of reporters. Alexander had tipped off. "Your Honor," Pendergast boomed, his voice dripping with theatrical outrage. "We are here to dissolve a fraud. My client, Alexander Hawthorne, is a titan of industry, a self-made man of integrity. And who did he drag up the ladder with him?" He whipped around, pointing a finger at Sarah like a loaded gun. Her, Sarah Hawthorne, a drifter with no education, no background, and 0 assets. My client gave her the world, Fifth Avenue, designer clothes, a life she didn't earn. And how did she repay him? Pendergast paused. The room was thick with silence, with laziness, with incompetence. Pendergast walked back to his table and lifted a thick, heavy file, shaking it for the benefit of the reporters in the back row. "These aren't just receipts, Your Honor," Pendergast said, his voice dropping to a theatrical hush. "These are proof of a calculated betrayal. While my client was working 18-hour days to put food on the table to build a legacy, Mrs. Hawthorne was entertaining guests." Alexander lowered his head, staring at his manicured fingernails. He put on a mask of pained sorrow, a performance so convincing it deserved an Academy Award. We are asking for a full annulment, Pendergast declared, slamming the file onto the table. We are asking that Mrs. Hawthorne be denied all alimony and removed from the marital residence immediately. Furthermore, we are countersuing for defamation of character, citing the severe emotional distress she has inflicted upon this good man. Timothy O'Malley, the young public defender, looked like he was going to be sick. He shot to his feet, knees knocking against the table leg. "Objection!" Timothy stammered, his voice climbing an octave. "Your Honor, this is preposterous. Sarah, Mrs. Hawthorne, has been a loyal wife for 10 years. There is no proof of—" "Sit down, Mr. O'Malley," Judge Bentley sighed, rubbing his temples. "You will have your turn. Don't make me hold you in contempt." Pendergast smirked at the kid. It was the look a wolf gives, a wounded rabbit. "The defense has nothing, Your Honor," Pendergast sneered, "because the defendant is nothing. She has no family to vouch for her, no character witnesses, no assets. She is a grifter who finally got caught." Alexander leaned over to his lawyer as Pendergast took his seat. "Brilliant, Arthur," he whispered. "Truly masterful. Did you see her face? She's paralyzed." "She's done," Pendergast whispered back, checking his watch. "We'll have the papers signed by noon, then lunch at Lou Bernardin. I'm craving the scallop ceviche." Sarah sat perfectly still. The insults didn't seem to touch her. Slowly, methodically, she reached into her cheap, worn-out purse and pulled out a small black device. It wasn't a phone. It was an old-school pager, the kind doctors used in the 1990s. It buzzed once, a harsh mechanical vibration, against the wood table. Sarah looked at the pager, then up at the clock on the wall. 10 o'clock, exactly. "Sarah?" Timothy whispered, eyeing the device. "What is that? Do you need a recess?" Sarah finally turned to her terrified lawyer. A small, sad smile touched her lips, a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Timothy," she said softly, "I told Alexander I came from a small town in Wyoming. That was true." "Okay." Timothy blinked, confused by the pivot. "But I never told him who ran the town." Timothy froze. "What?" "I told him I was estranged from my family, because they were difficult," Sarah continued, her voice losing its softness and gaining a sudden, steely edge. "I didn't tell him I left, because I wanted to see if anyone could love me. For me, not for my last name, not for the power attached to it." "Sarah, what are you talking about?" "He failed the test, Timothy." Sarah stood up. She didn't ask for permission. She didn't wait for the judge to acknowledge her. She simply stood, and the transformation was instantaneous. The slump in her shoulders vanished, her spine straightened, her chin lifted. In a blink, the tired housewife disappeared, replaced by a woman who looked taller, sharper, and infinitely more dangerous. "Your Honor," Sarah said. Her voice didn't waver. It cut through the courtroom murmurs like a whip crack. This wasn't the voice of a beaten victim. It was the voice of someone used to giving orders that were obeyed instantly. Judge Bentley lowered his glasses, looking annoyed. "Mrs. Hawthorne, your counsel will speak for." "My counsel has done an admirable job, given the lies he was fed by the opposition," Sarah interrupted. She was calm. Terrifyingly calm. "But my actual legal team has just arrived. I request a brief recess to allow them to enter the building." Alexander laughed out loud. He couldn't help it. "Legal team? What legal team?" He cleared his throat, mocking her. "The cashier from the grocery store? Or maybe the neighborhood cat sitter?" Pendergast rolled his eyes, standing up to protest. "Your Honor, this is a delay tactic. The woman is delirious. She has no resources, no money, and certainly no team." "The recess is denied," Judge Bentley barked, raising his gavel. "Sit down, Mrs. Hawthorne, or I will have you removed." Boom. The sound wasn't thunder. It was the heavy double doors at the back of the courtroom being thrown open with enough force to rattle the window panes in their frames. The laughter died in Alexander's throat. Every head in the room swiveled. The atmosphere shifted instantly. The air grew heavy, charged with sudden, violent pressure. Standing in the shattered doorway were 6 men. They weren't court security. They weren't NYPD. They were dressed in immaculate, tailored, black tactical suits that screamed private military. Earpieces coiled down their necks. They moved with synchronized fluidity, the kind you can't buy at a mall cop academy. This was elite, special operations level movement. They stepped aside in perfect unison, forming a corridor for whoever was behind them. Alexander frowned. A cold knot of dread tightened in his stomach. He looked at Sarah. She wasn't looking at the door. She was looking at him. And for the first time in 10 years, Alexander realized he didn't know the woman standing 3 feet away from him. "You really shouldn't have insulted my family, Alex," she whispered. Then a cane tapped against the floorboards. Tap, tap, tap. A silhouette stepped through the wall of muscle. Through the corridor of guards walked 2 figures. The man was older, perhaps 60, but he moved with a vitality that made him seem ageless. He wore a charcoal suit that cost more than Alexander's Ferrari. And he carried a silver-tipped cane, not because he needed it, but because in his hands, it looked like a weapon. His eyes were cold, piercing blue, the kind that could freeze water at 20 paces. Beside him walked a woman who looked like a younger, deadlier version of Sarah. She wore a white power suit, fitting like armor, and she carried a leather briefcase stamped with a gold crest, a lion holding a sword. Behind them marched a phalanx of 12 lawyers. These weren't the sweaty, frantic attorneys of the Manhattan lower courts. These were the great whites of the legal ocean. They marched in lockstep, carrying stacks of files with terrifying precision. "What is the meaning of this?" Judge Bentley demanded, though his voice cracked. "You cannot just barge into my courtroom." The silver-haired man stopped in the center of the aisle. He looked at the judge, then slowly turned his gaze to Alexander. He didn't look at him like a person. He looked at him like a stain on the carpet that needed to be scrubbed out. "My apologies, Your Honor," the man said. His voice was deep, smooth, and it commanded absolute silence. "We were delayed by your city's atrocious traffic. I am William Vander Quilt." The silence that followed was heavy. It was the sound of all the oxygen being sucked out of the room. Alexander's face went white. He knew that name. Everyone in business knew that name. The Vander Quilts weren't just rich. They were the bedrock of the American economy. They owned steel. They owned shipping. They owned media. And rumor had it, they owned half the Senate. They were old money that existed before the country had borders. "William Vander Quilt?" Arthur Pendergast stuttered, standing up. The industrialist?" "And I," the woman in the white suit said, stepping forward, "am Victoria Vander Quilt Sterling, senior partner at Sterling, Holt and Associates." Pendergast choked. Sterling, Holt and Associates was the most feared law firm in the Western Hemisphere. They handled international disputes, treaties, and the divorces of royalty. They didn't come to Superior Court for a tech CEO. "We are here representing the defendant," William Vander Quilt said. He turned his gaze to Sarah, and his cold eyes softened instantly. "Hello, sweetheart." Sarah stepped out from behind her table. She walked past a stunned Timothy O'Malley and embraced the older man. "Hi, Dad." "Dad?" Alexander shrieked the word. He stood up so fast, his chair toppled over with a crash. "That's impossible! She's Sarah Jones from Wyoming!" William Vander Quilt released his daughter and turned slowly to face Alexander. The look of affection vanished, replaced by glacial hatred. "She is Sarah Vander Quilt," William corrected, his voice dropping an octave. "She used her mother's maiden name, Jones, because she wanted a simple life. She wanted to find a man who loved her, not her inheritance." William took a step toward Alexander. The bodyguards tensed, ready to intercept, but William just leaned on his cane. "She thought she found that man in you." William said quietly, "We gave her 10 years, Mr. Hawthorne. 10 years to play house. We stayed away, as she asked. We let her live in your modest apartments. We let her drive your pedestrian cars. But then, you decided to hurt her." Victoria, Sarah's sister, slammed her briefcase onto the defense table. The sound echoed like a gunshot. "You didn't just file for divorce, Alexander," Victoria said, popping the latches on the case. "You tried to humiliate her. You fabricated evidence. You tried to leave. A Vander Quilt, penniless." She pulled out a document and held it up. "This is a motion to dismiss your fraudulent claims," Victoria announced. "And this," she pulled out a second document, much thicker, "is a countersuit." "Countersuit?" Pendergast managed to squeak. "On what grounds?" "Fraud," Victoria listed, ticking off her fingers. "Embezzlement, corporate espionage, adultery, and, oh, yes, conspiracy to defraud a federal judge." Alexander felt the room spinning. He gripped the table for support. "You're bluffing. Sarah is a nobody. She cooked my dinner. She did my laundry." "She did your laundry," William said, his voice dripping with disgust, "because she loved you, not because she had to. You treated a queen like a servant, and you were too stupid to notice the difference." Judge Bentley, realizing the gravity of the situation, cleared his throat nervously. Mr. Vanderquilt, while I respect your entrance, you cannot simply take over proceedings. Miss Vanderquilt Sterling, you must file an appearance, properly. Victoria smiled. It was a terrifying smile. She reached into her briefcase again. Already filed electronically, Your Honor, along with this. She tossed a glossy photograph onto the judge's bench. Judge Bentley picked it up. His eyes widened. He looked from the photo to Alexander, then back to the photo. Mr. Hawthorne, the judge said, his voice trembling. Is this you entering the Cayman Islands branch of secure banking with a bag full of cash yesterday? Alexander froze. He stopped breathing because he knew exactly what was in that bag, and he knew exactly whose money it was. Already filed electronically, Your Honor, Victoria said, her voice smooth as silk. 3 minutes ago, along with a request to transfer this case to the High Court due to the complexities of the assets involved. Alexander scoffed, a nervous, jagged sound escaping his throat. He tried to straighten his tie, tried to regain that shark-like composure that had served him so well for a decade. Assets, he spat. I'm the one with the assets. She has nothing. She's a housewife. Sarah spoke then. Her voice didn't boom. It didn't need to. It carried to every corner of the room with the weight of absolute authority. Alexander, she said, locking eyes with him. Who do you think funded your seed round for Hawthorne Tech back in 2014? Alexander blinked, thrown off balance. Angel investors, a blind consortium called V Group Holdings. V Group, Sarah repeated slowly. V, as in Vanderquilt. The blood drained from Alexander's face so fast, he looked like a wax figure, melting under heat lamps. The air in the room seemed to freeze. My trust fund, Sarah said simply. I authorized the investment 10 years ago. I own 49% of your company through shell corporations. My family owns another 2%. She smiled, a cold, sharp expression that mirrored her father's exactly. That means we own 51%. I'm not just your wife, Alexander. I'm your boss. Arthur Pendergast looked like he was having a cardiac event. He clutched his chest, mouth opening and closing like a landed fish. We are freezing all assets of Hawthorne Tech, effective immediately, Victoria announced, handing a fresh sheet of paper to the stunned bailiff. We are also serving you with an eviction notice for the penthouse on Park Avenue. That building is owned by Vanderquilt Real Estate. You have 24 hours to vacate. You can't do this, Alexander screamed, his voice cracking into a high-pitched shriek. He pointed a trembling finger at Sarah. I'm the CEO. I built that company with my money. With my money, Sarah corrected. And my patience, both of which have just run out. William Vanderquilt tapped his silver-tipped cane on the floor. Tap, tap, Your Honor, the patriarch said. I suggest a recess. My soon-to-be ex-son-in-law looks like he needs to call his mistress and tell her he can't cover the bill at the Ritz anymore. The courtroom erupted into chaos. Reporters went frantic, thumbs flying across phone screens, live tweeting the fall of a titan. Timothy O'Malley, the public defender, just stared at Sarah, mouth hanging open. Judge Bentley banged his gavel. The sound barely cut through the noise. Order! Order in this court. We will take a 1-hour recess. As the judge retreated to his chambers, Alexander slumped into his chair. He looked up at Sarah, searching for the woman who used to rub his back after long meetings. The woman who clipped coupons for groceries. She was gone. In her place was a stranger, backed by an army. Sarah leaned across the aisle, invading his personal space. You wanted a war, Alexander? She whispered. The Vanderquilts don't lose wars. We end them. She turned and walked out, flanked by her father, her sister, and the wall of tactical security. Alexander was left alone in the noise, the smell of his expensive cologne, now sour, with the scent of pure, unadulterated fear. The hour-long recess was barely 10 minutes old, and Alexander Hawthorne was already breaking every traffic law in Manhattan. He was tearing down 2nd Avenue in his Porsche 911, weaving through gridlock with the desperation of a cornered animal. His hands were shaking so violently on the leather steering wheel that he could barely keep the car in the lane. It's a bluff, he muttered to himself, sweat stinging his eyes. It has to be a bluff. Nobody hides being a billionaire for 10 years. Nobody. He fumbled for his phone, almost dropping it into the passenger footwell. He speed-dialed Leonard Banks, his chief financial officer. Leonard was the only other person who knew where the skeletons were buried. the only one who could access the darker corners of the company ledger. Alexander screamed the moment the line connected. "Leonard, where are you?" I'm at the office, Alex." Leonard's voice sounded wrong, thin, strained, like someone was standing directly behind him with a knife to his throat. "Listen, you shouldn't come here," Leonard stammered. "I'm the CEO. I go where I please." Alexander shouted, swerving around a delivery truck. "Listen to me closely. I need you to transfer the offshore accounts, the Caymans, the Zurich hold. Move it all to the crypto wallets we discussed last month. Do it now." There was a long, suffocating silence on the other end. "Leonard, did you hear me?" "I can't do that, Alex." "Why the hell not?" "Because," Leonard whispered, his voice trembling, "they are already here." Click. The line went dead. Alexander slammed the phone onto the passenger seat. He floored the accelerator, blowing through a solid red light at 65th Street. Horns blared around him, but he didn't hear them. He needed to get to the server room. He needed to wipe the drives, and before the Vanderquilt tech team breached the firewalls, he thought he was racing against time. He didn't realize he was driving straight into a trap set 10 years ago. Alexander screeched his Porsche into the underground garage of Hawthorne Tech, leaving $100 of rubber on the concrete. He didn't bother parking. He abandoned the car in the fire lane and sprinted toward the private executive elevator. He jammed his thumb against the biometric scanner. Beep, beep, beep. A small red light pulsed. Access denied. "Come on." Alexander hissed, wiping sweat from his thumb on his designer jacket. He pressed it again, harder this time, as if force could override code. Beep, beep, beep. User ID invalid. Damn it! He kicked the brushed steel doors, leaving a scuff mark on his own reflection. "Mr. Hawthorne." Alexander spun around. 2 security guards stood there, men he had hired, men whose families ate because he signed their paychecks. But they weren't smiling. They weren't rushing to open the door. They stood with arms crossed, watching him with a mix of pity and professional detachment. "Open this elevator," Alexander barked, his voice echoing in the concrete garage. "The system is glitching." "It's not a glitch, sir," the taller guard said. He didn't move. "We've been ordered to escort you to the boardroom. Visitor pass only." Visitor. The word hit Alexander like a physical slap. The veins in his neck bulged. "I own this building. I built this tower. This way, sir." They didn't ask. They flanked him, boxing him in, and marched him past the executive lift to the service elevator, the one used for trash and catering. The humiliation burned hotter than fire. Alexander Hawthorne, the tech visionary, was being dragged through the back entrance of his own empire. When the elevator doors dinged open, on the 40th floor, the office was deathly quiet. Usually, this floor buzzed with the chaotic energy of analysts and developers. Today, it was a tomb. Everyone was at their desks, heads down, pretending to work. But Alexander could feel their eyes on him. The gossip mill moved faster than fiber optics. They knew. He pushed past the guards and threw open the double-glass doors of the boardroom. The scene before him stopped him cold. The long mahogany table was full. The entire board of directors was present. Men and women Alexander had bullied, charmed, and manipulated for years. Usually, they looked at him with deference. Today, they were studying their cuticles. And at the head of the table, in his seat, sat Sarah. She wasn't wearing the faded gray dress from the courtroom anymore. In the hour since they had left, she had transformed. She wore a tailored navy blazer that screamed authority. Her hair was loose, cascading over her shoulders. She looked comfortable in the leather chair. She looked like she belonged there. To her right sat William Vanderquilt, looking bored as he reviewed a stack of spreadsheets. To her left was Victoria, tapping away on a tablet. And standing in the corner, looking pale, sweating through his shirt, was Leonard Banks, the CFO. "You're in my chair," Alexander snarled, striding forward. "I'm in the chairman's chair," Sarah corrected. Calmly. She didn't stand up, she didn't flinch. "And since I represent the majority shareholder interest as of 45 minutes ago, this is my seat." "You can't just take over." Alexander slammed his hands on the table, making the water pitchers tremble. "I have a contract. I have executive protection. Article 15, Section C of your employment agreement," Victoria spoke up, not even looking up from her tablet. "The CEO may be removed immediately and without severance in the event of gross misconduct or criminal negligence." "I haven't done anything criminal," Alexander lied. His eyes darted to Leonard in the corner. This is a hostile takeover based on paranoia. Sarah picked up a blue file folder from the table and slid it across the mahogany surface. It stopped perfectly at the edge, right in front of Alexander's waist. Leonard told us everything, Alex, Sarah said softly. Alexander froze. The renovation costs for the penthouse that were billed as server farm cooling upgrades, Sarah listed. The private jet trips to Mykonos listed as client development. The diamond tennis bracelet for Jessica labeled as office supplies. Alexander whipped his head toward the corner. You traitor! I have a family! Alex, please, Leonard stammered, wiping grease from his forehead with a handkerchief. Mr. Vanderquilt's auditors found the discrepancies. In 10 minutes, they offered me immunity if I cooperated. I couldn't go to prison for you. Alexander felt the floor tilting. He was losing gravity. So what? You fire me. Fine, I still have my shares. I have 30% of this company. I'll sell them to a competitor and burn this place to the ground. William Vanderquilt finally looked up. He took off his reading glasses and folded them slowly. The click echoed in the silent room. Actually, you don't, William said. His voice was gravel and thunder. You took out a high-interest loan against your equity 3 years ago to pay off your gambling debts in Vegas. Remember, you used your shares as collateral. Alexander stopped breathing. He had hoped that secret was buried deep enough to never see the light. The loan was held by a private equity firm called Centurion Capital, William continued. Guess who owns Centurion? Alexander didn't answer. The air was stuck in his throat. I do. William smiled. It was a shark smile. And since you missed your last 2 margin calls, I foreclosed on the collateral this morning. Your shares are mine. Alexander stumbled back, gripping the back of a visitor's chair to keep from collapsing. This is a setup. You planned this. You trapped me. I didn't trap you, Alexander, Sarah said, finally standing up. She walked around the table until she was standing, inches from him. Her eyes were clear, devoid of the fear he used to see in them. I gave you a safety net, she whispered. I covered for you. I used my dividends to plug the holes you dug in the company finances because I wanted you to succeed. I wanted to believe you were just stressed, not corrupt. She leaned in close, her voice dropping to a terrifying chill. But then you looked at me across the breakfast table last week and told me I was dead weight. You told me I was holding you back. Sarah reached into her pocket and pulled out a cell phone. His cell phone, the one he had left in the car. You were wrong, Alex, she said, pressing the phone into his chest. I wasn't holding you back. I was the only thing holding you up. And then the boardroom doors opened again. But this time, it wasn't security. It was 2 agents, wearing windbreakers with 3 yellow letters on the back. FBI. Sarah's voice trembled. It wasn't sadness. It was the terrifying low-frequency vibration of suppressed rage. You wanted to fly, Alex, she asked, her eyes boring into him. You wanted to be a god among men? Fine, fly. But I'm taking back the wings I bought you. She turned to the stunned board of directors, ignoring the federal agents, waiting by the door. I call for a vote to remove Alexander Hawthorne as CEO, effective immediately, pending a federal criminal investigation into embezzlement and fraud. Seconded, said Marcus, a board member Alexander had golfed with for 5 years, a man he considered a friend. Marcus didn't even look up from the table. All in favor? Sarah asked. Every hand in the room went up, even Leonard's. Motion carried, Sarah said, the gavel in her voice slamming down harder than wood ever could. She looked at the 2 large security guards. Please escort Mr. Hawthorne off the premises. He is not to remove any items from his office. His personal effects will be boxed and shipped to, well, wherever he ends up living. Sarah, wait, Alexander pleaded, his arrogance finally shattering into raw, ugly panic. He lunged toward her, reaching for her arm. The guard stepped in, grabbing Alexander's wrist in a vice grip that promised a fracture if he struggled. Don't touch her, sir. Sarah, please, we can talk about this. Alexander shouted, fighting the hold. I was stressed. The market was volatile. I made mistakes, but I did it for us. I love you. Sarah stopped. The room went silent. For a split second, Alexander saw a flash of the woman who had loved him for a decade, the woman who had nursed him through ulcers and panic attacks. But then, the steel door of the Vanderquilt vault slammed shut in her eyes. You don't love me, Alex, she said. Her voice was flat, clinical. You loved the idea. that you were better than me. She turned her back on him. Goodbye. Get him out of here, William Vanderquilt ordered, waving his hand like he was swatting a fly. As Alexander was dragged out of the boardroom, screaming obscenities that echoed down the hallway, Sarah didn't look back. She simply sat down in the leather CEO's chair. She took a deep breath and looked at the board. Now, she said, let's get to work on cleaning up this mess. The sidewalk outside Hawthorne Tech was a wind tunnel, a brisk New York afternoon, typical for November. But to Alexander, it felt like the Arctic Circle. He stood there on the concrete, no coat, no briefcase, no dignity. The security guards had literally tossed him out the revolving doors. He stumbled, catching his balance, just before hitting a trash can. Passers-by stared, a few tourists pointed, and Alexander realized with a jolt of nausea that a teenager was filming him with an iPhone, likely live-streaming the fall of a tech giant to TikTok. He needed to get away. He needed a drink. He needed a plan. He patted his pockets. He still had his phone and his wallet. That was something. He stepped to the curb and hailed a cab. Alexander Hawthorne, a man who hadn't flown commercial in 4 years, was flagging down a yellow taxi like a common tourist. The Ritz-Carlton, he snapped, slamming the door. And step on it. He dialed Jessica. She was his lifeline now. She was smart, she was connected, and unlike Sarah, she understood the world of high stakes. They could flee the country. He had hidden cash. Surely he had something stashed away that the Vanderquilts couldn't touch. Alex? Jessica answered on the first ring. Where are you? I've been waiting for 2 hours. The room service champagne is warm. Forget the champagne, Alexander barked, his voice shaking. Pack your bags. We're leaving. Leaving? What are you talking about? Did you win? It's complicated. Just pack. I'm 5 minutes away. He hung up and frantically opened his banking app. He needed to transfer whatever cash he had in his personal checking account to a prepaid crypto card before the freeze hit. He logged in. Face ID spun for a second. Balance, $0. He blinked. He refreshed the page with a trembling finger. Balance, negative $250. Overdraft. What? He screamed, startling the cab driver. That's impossible. There was $200,000 in there this morning. He tapped on the transaction history. One massive transfer, time-stamped 20 minutes ago. Label, court-ordered asset freeze. Superior Court docket, 49,221. No. The cab pulled up to the Ritz. That'll be $22.50, buddy, the driver said, eyeing him in the rearview mirror. Alexander handed over his Black American Express Centaur Eon card. The titanium felt heavy in his hand. The driver swiped it on his mobile terminal. Beep, declined. Try it again, Alexander snapped, sweat dripping down his temple. It's a black card. It has no limit. It's declined, pal. Try another one. Alexander tried his Visa. Declined. His MasterCard. Declined. Even his corporate expense card. Declined. The driver turned around, his eyes narrowing. You look like you got problems. You got cash? Alexander tore through his wallet. He had a single $20 bill, tucked behind a receipt. He threw it at the driver. Keep the change, he muttered, scrambling out of the cab before the guy could ask for the other $2.50. He ran into the lobby. The gold leaf opulence of the Ritz, usually so comforting, now felt mocking. He sprinted to the elevators, ignoring the concierge's greeting, and rode up to the suite. He burst into the room. Jessica was lounging on the velvet sofa, scrolling through Instagram. She looked up, annoyed, but her expression curdled when she saw him, disheveled, sweating, tie crooked, eyes wild. My God, Alex, she said, sitting up. You look like a wreck. What happened? They froze the accounts, Alexander gasped, pacing the room like a caged animal. Everything, the personal accounts, the joint accounts, the offshore shells, it's all gone. What do you mean, gone? Jessica's voice rose. They can't just take it. They knew everything, Jessica. Sarah, she's not who we thought she was. Jessica frowned, standing up. What do you mean? She's the peasant from Wyoming. We talked about this. Alexander stopped pacing. He looked at his mistress, the woman he had destroyed his marriage for, and laughed. A dry, hysterical sound. She's not a peasant, Jessica. She's a Vanderquilt. Jessica dropped her phone. It hit the carpet with a dull thud. As if on cue, the hotel room phone began to ring. Jessica didn't answer it. She just stared at Alexander with pure horror. A Vanderquilt? Jessica whispered. As in the Vanderquilts? Yes, Alexander said, hope clawing at his throat. Yes, Her father is William Vanderquilt. They ambushed me, Jess. They took the company. They took the house. They took everything. He stepped forward and grabbed Jessica's shoulders. His grip was desperate. But we can fix this. You have savings, right? We can go to Mexico tonight. I can rebuild. I have contacts in Cabo. I just need you to float us for a few weeks until I get back on my feet. Jessica stared at him. Then, slowly, deliberately, she reached up and peeled his hands off her shoulders like they were covered in filth. She took a step back, creating distance that felt like miles. You lost the company? She asked, her voice dangerously calm. They stole it, but I'll get it back. I just need. Jessica laughed. It wasn't a nice laugh. It was cold, cruel, and it reminded him terrifyingly of Arthur Pendergast. Float us? She repeated, raising an eyebrow. Alex, do you know why I'm with you? Because we're soulmates, Alexander said, though the words tasted like ash. Because we understand each other. I'm with you because you bought me a Cartier bracelet last Tuesday, Jessica said flatly. I'm with you because you promised to make me VP of marketing. I'm with you because you were a winner. She looked him up and down, curling her lip in genuine disgust. But right now, you look like a loser, a broke loser. Jessica, don't Jessica me. You're telling me you're up against the Vanderquilts? You're dead meat, Alex. They will crush you into dust, and I am not getting dust on my Gucci heels. She walked over to the bed, grabbed her Chanel purse, and slung it over her shoulder. Where are you going? Alexander asked, his voice cracking. Out. I have a date with that hedge fund guy, Michael. He's been texting me for weeks. I didn't answer because you were the bigger fish. She shrugged, checking her reflection in the mirror. Now you're just bait. You can't leave me. I left my wife for you, and she turned out to be a billionaire. Jessica scoffed, opening the hotel room door. Looks like you're the idiot, Alex. Don't call me. Slam. The door rattled in its frame. Alexander stood in the silence of the luxury suite. He was alone, truly, utterly alone. Knock, knock, knock. Hope flared in his chest, like a match in a dark room. Jessica came back. She realized she was wrong. He rushed to the door and threw it open. Jess, I knew you. It wasn't Jessica. Standing in the hallway was Victoria Vanderquilt Sterling. She was flanked by two uniformed NYPD officers. Mr. Hawthorne, Victoria said, crisp and professional. She held out a manila envelope. What is this? Alexander whispered, backing away. I tried to catch you at the office, but you left in such a hurry, Victoria said, stepping into the room, uninvited. This is a subpoena and a warrant. Warrant? Grand larceny, wire fraud, embezzlement. Victoria smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. A shark smile. My father doesn't like it when people steal from his family. We did a full forensic audit over lunch. It seems you stole about $5 million from the company accounts over the last 4 years. The police officer stepped forward, unhooking the cuffs from his belt. Alexander Hawthorne, you are under arrest. No, Alexander whimpered as the cold steel clicked around his wrists. This can't be real. Oh, it's very real, Victoria said, watching with clinical detachment as the officers spun him around. And Alex, the hotel manager asked me to tell you that your credit card was declined for the room. They'll be holding your luggage until payment is rendered. I have nothing, Alexander screamed as he was led down the hallway, past stunned hotel guests peering out of their doors. I have nothing. Victoria watched him go. Then she pulled out her phone. She dialed a number. Hey, Dad, she said. It's done. He's in custody. Tell Sarah she can go home. The pest control is finished. Rikers Island was a far cry from the penthouse overlooking Central Park. The air smelled of industrial cleaner, mold, and unwashed bodies. For Alexander Hawthorne, the 48 hours he spent in holding felt like a lifetime. When he finally made bail, posted by a shady associate from his gambling days who demanded a predatory 40% interest rate, Alexander emerged into the sunlight, looking like a ghost. His bespoke Italian suit was wrinkled and stained. His stubble was graying. His eyes were bloodshot and hollow. He didn't have his Porsche. He didn't have his driver. He had an UberX waiting for him. A dented Honda Civic, paid for with a prepaid debit card, he had managed to secure. Take me to the Motel 6 in Queens, Alexander muttered, sliding into the back seat. He had one card left to play. The legal battle was a losing game. The Vanderquilt lawyers were already dissecting his life with surgical precision. They would bury him in motions until he died of old age. But Alexander knew something. The Vanderquilts didn't. He knew the power of a sob story. In the age of social media, in the cramped, musty motel room that smelled of stale cigarettes, Alexander set up his war room. He couldn't afford Arthur Pendergast anymore. Pendergast wouldn't even return his calls. The man had likely scrubbed Alexander's name from his client list the moment the handcuffs went on. Instead, Alexander had hired Gary Finkel, a lawyer whose office was located above a laundromat in Hell's Kitchen, a man who advertised on the back of bus benches. Gary Finkel sat on the edge of the wobbling motel desk, chewing on a toothpick that had seen better days. His suit was 2 sizes too big, and his office was technically the back booth of a diner in Hell's Kitchen. But right now, he was Alexander's only hope. "Look, Alex," Finkel said, gesturing with the toothpick. "We can't win on the fraud charges. The paper trail is too deep. The feds have the receipts. But we can win in the court of public opinion." "The court of public opinion?" Alexander scoffed, pacing the stained carpet. "I embezzled $5 million, Gary. They have me on tape." "Allegedly," Finkel corrected, with a sleazy wink. "But look at the narrative. Sarah lied about her identity for 10 years. That is fraud by omission. She entrapped you. She pretended to be poor to test you. That's not a marriage. That's a sick psychological experiment." Finkel leaned in, eyes gleaming. "People hate billionaires, Alex. They hate the Vanderquilts. If we spin this right, you aren't a criminal. You're the victim of a cruel elite family playing games with a working-class guy." Alexander stopped pacing. A slow, dark smile spread across his face. "I'm the victim," he whispered, tasting the lie. "Exactly. We go to the press. We tell them she set you up. We tell them you only moved the money to protect the company because you suspected a hostile takeover, which, technically, she did execute." The next morning, the strategy went live. Alexander sat across from the Morning Pulse anchor, Sue Vanna Grace, under the harsh glare of studio lights. He wasn't wearing his Italian suits. He wore a soft beige cashmere sweater that made him look approachable, humble, broken. "I didn't know who she was," Alexander said, his voice cracking perfectly as he wiped away a tear that wasn't there. "I married Sarah Jones. I loved Sarah Jones. For 10 years, I worked myself to the bone to provide for us. And all that time, she was laughing at me." Savannah leaned in, her face a mask of sympathetic outrage. "Laughing at you?" "She was sitting on a fortune," Alexander continued, looking directly into the camera, "watching me struggle with stress, watching me get ulcers from worrying about payroll, and she did nothing. It was a game to her." "And the embezzlement charges?" Savannah asked softly. "The $5 million? "A misunderstanding," Alexander lied, smoothly. "I noticed irregularities in the accounts. I was trying to move funds to a secure holding to protect the company. I didn't know the irregularities were her. The Vanderquilts? They destroy people for sport. I'm just a guy from Queens who tried to build a tech company, and they took it all because I didn't pass their sick little test." The interview hit the internet like a nuclear bomb. Within hours, #JusticeForAlex was the #1 trend on X, formerly Twitter. TikTok sleuths began digging into the Vanderquilt family history, painting them as Illuminati-level villains who toyed with commoners for entertainment. The narrative shifted violently. Alexander wasn't the cheating embezzler anymore. He was the pawn in a billionaire's twisted game. High above the chaos, in the library of the Vanderquilt estate in the Hamptons, the mood was apocalyptic. William Vanderquilt watched the 60-inch screen with a face like thunder. His knuckles were white as he gripped his cane. "I will buy that network," William growled, reaching for his phone. "I will buy it, burn it down, and fire everyone who aired that filth." "No, Dad," Sarah said. She was sitting by the window, looking out at the gray Atlantic Ocean, sipping herbal tea. She looked calm, but it was the calm of a sniper, waiting for the wind to die down. "Let him talk," Sarah said softly. "Let him build his tower." "He's slandering the family name," Victoria yelled, pacing the room in her heels. "He's making us look like monsters. The board is panicking. Our stock dropped 2 points this morning. We need to sue him for defamation right now." "Alexander is a narcissist," Sarah said, finally turning from the window. "He thinks he's winning because people are listening, but he forgets one thing." "What's that?" Victoria snapped. "He forgets that I lived with him for 10 years, Sarah said. Her eyes were cold, hard flint. "I know where he keeps the skeletons, not the financial ones, the real ones." Sarah stood and set her teacup down. It made a sharp clink in the silence. Get the legal team ready. He wants a public fight? We'll give him one. Agree to his demand for a deposition. But on one condition. What condition? William asked. We live stream it, Sarah said. He wants transparency? Let's give it to him. Uncut, raw. Victoria stopped pacing. A slow, predatory grin stretched across her face. I love it when you get mean. I'm not getting mean, Vic, Sarah replied, walking toward the door. I'm getting even. 2 weeks later, the stage was set. The deposition was scheduled in a neutral conference room at the Four Seasons Hotel in Midtown. Because of the intense media storm Alexander had whipped up, the judge had agreed to the unusual request. Portions of the testimony would be released to the press, supposedly to ensure transparency, given the high-profile accusations of corporate entrapment. Alexander walked into the conference room with Gary Finkel, feeling like a king. He had the public on his side. He had momentum. He wore a fresh suit, purchased with donation money from his GoFundMe page. And he wore a confident smirk. He thought he was walking into a negotiation. He thought he was about to secure a settlement that would set him up for life. He didn't notice the room was temperature controlled to be slightly too cold. He didn't notice his chair was positioned slightly lower than the others. And he certainly didn't notice the stack of files in front of Sarah. Files that had nothing to do with bank accounts and everything to do with the nights he thought no one was watching. Please state your name for the record, the court reporter droned. Alexander Hawthorne, he said, leaning back, ready to perform. Sarah looked at him across the table. She didn't smile. She just opened the first file, and the sound of paper turning was the loudest thing in the room. Mr. Hawthorne, Sarah began, her voice deceptively gentle. You claim you were a devoted husband who was deceived by my family. Is that correct? That is correct, Alexander said, playing to the camera in the corner. Then explain to me, Sarah said, pulling out a grainy black and white photograph, why you were seen entering a fertility clinic in 2018 with my sister's former assistant. Alexander leaned into the microphone, voice thick with practiced emotion. He had raised $50,000 on GoFundMe from strangers who bought his poor husband act. He had retold the lie so many times that he had started to believe it. Mr. Hawthorne, Robert Graves began. Graves wasn't just a lawyer. He was the Vander Quilt family's legal Rottweiler. He adjusted the camera lens, the red recording light blinking like an unblinking eye. You have stated publicly that you were unaware of your wife's wealth, Graves said, and that you moved company funds solely to protect the assets from a hostile takeover. Is that correct? That is correct, Alexander said, meeting the camera's gaze. I was trying to save the company from what I thought were external threats. I had no idea my wife was the threat. And you claim you were a faithful, loving husband who was emotionally manipulated? Absolutely, Alexander whispered, wiping a non-existent tear. I loved Sarah. I would have died for her. Sarah didn't flinch. She didn't scream. She simply reached into her blazer pocket and slid a small silver USB drive across the polished table. It spun and stopped directly in front of the court stenographer. Exhibit A, Sarah said softly. Gary Finkel, Alexander's strip mall lawyer, frowned. Objection. What is this? We weren't notified of digital evidence. It was obtained yesterday, Sarah said, her voice ice cold. From the cloud server of your personal phone, Alexander. You really should have changed your password after I left. Password 123 is hardly Fort Knox. Alexander paled? That's an invasion of privacy. It's company property, Sarah corrected. The phone was paid for by Hawthorne Tech. The data belongs to me. Robert Graves plugged the drive into a laptop connected to a 60-inch monitor on the wall. Let's play file, voice memo, November 12th. The room filled with static. Then, Alexander's voice rang out, clear as day. He sounded drunk, arrogant, nasty. He wasn't talking to Sarah. He was talking to Jessica. I tell you, Jess, it's almost too easy. The dumb cow doesn't suspect a thing. I just signed the transfer for another $1 million. I'm going to bleed this company dry, declare bankruptcy, and leave Sarah with the debt. She's so desperate for my approval, she'll sign anything. I can't wait to dump her and get a real life. The silence in the room was deafening. Alexander's mouth opened and closed like a fish on a dock. The victim narrative he spent weeks building evaporated in 10 seconds of audio. And let's look at this, Sarah said, motioning to the screen. An email chain appeared. between Alexander and a known corporate raider based in the Caymans. Subject, selling out Sarah. Body, once I strip the assets, you can buy the shell for pennies. I'll make sure the wife takes the fall for the IRS audit. She's clueless. I need the cash for the markers in Macau. Gary Finkel closed his notebook. The color had drained from his face. He looked at his client with sheer disgust. You told me you were innocent, Finkel hissed. I. Alexander stammered, sweat beading on his forehead. Those are deep fakes, AI generated. They're trying to frame me. They are authenticated by 3 independent forensic data firms, Victoria interrupted, checking her nails. And we have the gambling markers from the Vu Ni Shun Macau to match the dates. You're not a victim, Alex. You're a gambling addict. Sarah stood up. The cameras were rolling, capturing every frame of Alexander's disintegration. You weren't the victim, Alex, she said, her voice trembling with the weight of the truth. You were the parasite. You didn't just steal my money. You stole 10 years of my life. You made me believe I wasn't good enough, wasn't smart enough. You broke me down so you could feel tall. She leaned over the table, towering over him. But here's the twist. You didn't see coming. You said on that tape you wanted to leave me with the debt? Well, the Van der Quilt auditors found a clause in the corporate bylaws. A clause you wrote 5 years ago to protect yourself from liability suits. Sarah smiled. It was the most terrifying thing Alexander had ever seen. It states that any officer found guilty of fraud is personally liable for all company debts. Hawthorne Tech is currently in debt to V Group Holdings for $40 million. Alexander felt the blood leave his head. The room started to spin. Since you are the one who committed the fraud, Sarah whispered, the debt isn't the company's anymore. It's yours. 41 million to be precise, Victoria added, cheerfully, plus interest. You will go to prison, Alexander, Sarah said, and when you get out, you will spend the rest of your life working to pay me back. Every paycheck, every dime. You will never own anything again. You are not just broke, you are owned by me. Alexander looked at the camera, then at his lawyer. Finkel stood up and shoved his papers into his briefcase. I'm resigning as counsel, he muttered. I don't represent perjurers. Good luck, pal. You can't leave me. Alexander shrieked, grabbing Finkel's sleeve. They're going to kill me. No, Alexander, Sarah said, turning to walk out. We aren't going to kill you. We're going to let you live the life you were so afraid of. She stopped at the door. You're going to be poor. You're going to be a nobody, and everyone will know exactly who you are. Sarah walked out. As the heavy door clicked shut, Alexander Hawthorne slumped onto the table, sobbing. It wasn't the fake sobbing of the TV interview. It was the guttural, terrified sound of a man who realized he'd fallen off the top of the world and hit every single branch on the way down. 6 months later, the media frenzy had finally died down. The hashtag Justice for Alex had vanished, replaced by memes mocking his tearful breakdown. The world had moved on. But for Alexander, time had stopped. The man who once wore $1,000 suits was now standing in the grease-stained uniform of a fry cook at a diner in New Jersey. The heat from the grill was blistering. His face was gaunt, his eyes hollowed out by months of sleepless nights and the crushing weight of a debt he could never repay. Order up, he croaked, sliding a plate of eggs onto the counter. He wiped his hands on his apron and looked up at the clock. 5 more hours. Then he could go back to the halfway house. The bell above the diner door jingled. Alexander didn't look up. He scraped the grill, lost in his own misery. But then he felt it, a change in the air pressure, a silence that swept through the noisy diner like a cold wind. He looked up. Standing at the counter wasn't a customer. It was a man in a black tactical suit. And behind him, stepping out of the rain, was a figure Alexander hadn't seen since the courtroom. But it wasn't Sarah, and it wasn't Victoria. It was someone much, much worse. It was the U.S. Marshals, arriving to revoke his bail. His time was finally up. The sentencing hearing took place in the same courtroom where Alexander had once laughed at the prospect of divorcing Sarah. He had walked in there 6 months ago, believing he was the predator. Today, he was the prey. The room wasn't filled with his high-priced legal sharks or the sycophants who used to laugh at his jokes. It was filled with the heavy, suffocating silence of inevitability. Alexander stood before Judge Bentley. The bespoke Italian suits were gone. In their place hung a bright orange jumpsuit. Standard issue for the Federal Bureau of Prisons. The prison barber had shaved his head, exposing a pale scalp. A man who looked 20 years older than 38. He had lost 30 pounds. His skin was sallow, his posture defeated. His eyes darted nervously around the room, looking for a savior that wasn't coming. Sarah sat in the gallery, flanked by her father and Victoria. She wore a white dress, simple, architectural, elegant. Right, a stark, blinding contrast to the drab gray she wore the day this war began. She didn't look like a victim anymore. She looked like a queen, waiting for an execution. Alexander Hawthorne, Judge Bentley said, looking down from the bench with zero sympathy. He adjusted his glasses, reading from a thick file. You have pleaded guilty to 3 counts of wire fraud, 2 counts of embezzlement, and 1 count of perjury. You betrayed the trust of your investors, your employees, and most egregiously, your wife. Alexander didn't speak. He just stared at the floor, hands trembling in heavy steel cuffs. The prosecution has recommended the maximum sentence, the judge continued, his voice echoing in the quiet room. And frankly, I see no reason to deviate. You are sentenced to 15 years in federal prison. A gasp rippled through the reporters in the back row. 15 years. In the world of finance, that was a lifetime. By the time he got out, the technology he once built would be in a museum. Furthermore, the judge added, peering over his rims, restitution is set at $42 million, payable to Hawthorne Tech and its parent company, V Group Holdings. Your assets have already been liquidated, yielding approximately $3 million. The remainder will be garnished from any future earnings until the debt is satisfied. Bam! The gavel banged. It sounded like a coffin lid slamming shut. As the U.S. Marshals moved to take him away, Alexander turned. He looked at Sarah for the first time in 6 months. He didn't look angry. He didn't look manipulative. He just looked pathetic. A broken man, realizing he had broken himself. Sarah, he rasped, his voice raw from disuse. I'm sorry. Sarah stood up. The movement was fluid, graceful. She walked to the railing that separated the gallery from the court floor. She looked at the man she had wasted a decade on. She searched herself for anger, for hatred, for the burning desire for revenge, but she found none of it. All she felt was distant, cold, pity. I know you are, Alex, she said softly. You're sorry. You got caught. No, He choked back a sob. Tears cut tracks through the grime on his face. I had everything. I had you. Why was I so stupid? Because you thought power was something you took from others, Sarah said. Her voice was clear, strong, final. You didn't realize that true power is what you give. I gave you everything, Alex. I gave you my heart, my trust, and my family's resources, and you threw it away for an illusion. She turned to leave. Sarah, he called out, desperation clawing at his throat as the marshals grabbed his arms. Will you visit me? Sarah stopped. She looked at her father. He gave her a supportive nod, leaning on his silver-tipped cane. She looked at her sister, Victoria, already checking her watch, ready to conquer the next boardroom. Then she looked back at Alexander, one last time. No, Alex, she said. I have a company to run and a life to live. Goodbye. She walked out of the courtroom, the heavy oak doors closing behind her with a definitive, echoing thud. Outside, the air was crisp, clean. It was spring in New York. The trees in the park were budding. The city felt alive. Electric. The paparazzi were waiting at the bottom of the steps, a sea of flashing bulbs and shouting voices. Mrs. Hawthorne, how do you feel? Is it true you're taking over as permanent CEO? What's next for the Vanderquilt empire? Sarah stopped at the bottom of the steps. She put on her oversized sunglasses, shielding her eyes from the glare. She looked at the sea of microphones. My name, she said, smiling for the cameras, is Sarah Vanderquilt. And what's next? Everything. She slid into the back of the waiting limousine where her father was already pouring 2 glasses of sparkling water. You did good, kid, William said, clinking his glass against hers. You handled him with grace, better than I would have. I would have bought the prison and turned off the heat in his cell block. Sarah laughed, a genuine happy sound that felt like freedom. That won't be necessary, Dad. Living with himself will be punishment enough. So, Victoria asked, flipping open her laptop as the car merged into Manhattan traffic. We have a board meeting at 3. The Asian markets are opening. We need to discuss the expansion into Tokyo. The projections are looking good, but we need a steady hand on the wheel. Sarah leaned back into the leather seat, closing her eyes. For a moment, she thought of the small town in Wyoming where she had tried to hide. She thought of the lonely nights in the penthouse waiting for a husband who didn't care. She thought of the fear she used to live with, the constant feeling that she wasn't enough. And then she let it all go. She opened her eyes. They were bright with purpose. "Let's do it," Sarah said. "I have some ideas about Tokyo." And that is how Alexander Hawthorne learned the hardest lesson of his life. Never underestimate the quiet ones. He thought he was crushing a powerless wife, but he was actually waking a sleeping giant. Sarah didn't just win her freedom, she reclaimed her identity and her empire, proving that while money can buy silence, it cannot buy loyalty, and it certainly cannot buy class. And that brings us to the end of this saga, a brutal reminder that the truth always has a way of coming out. Usually, right when you think you've buried it deep enough. Until next time, stay safe and watch who you trust.